I'm Jono Buchanan. So far on our music theory voyage, we've discovered scales, both major and minor, and now we've begun to explore chords. Now, generally speaking, what we've done so far is we've looked at what we refer to as diatonic chords, so chords made up of steps 1, 3, and 5. In the scale of C major, we've discovered that what that means is if we want to conform to C major, that gives us C major as chord 1, D minor as chord 2, E minor as chord 3, F major as chord 4, G major as chord 5, A minor as chord 6, and then B diminished as chord 7 before we get back to C major again. Why? Because we have to play the notes of C major, and they are all the white notes. So the same thing would be true if I changed key. I just need to keep the relationship between those things in place. So that would introduce the sharps and flats of different key signatures. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Okay, so staying in C major, does that mean that I've either got to always use this 1, 3, 5 chord, or can I do other things with it as well? Now, one of the things that's just so wonderful about music theory is that straight away, we can learn all of the things that we've learned already, and we can apply them. They will always keep us on the straight and narrow, but rules are there to be broken as well. So absolutely, we can start adding other things to make our chords a bit more interesting. And what we're going to do in this chapter is to learn what happens when we start doing exactly that. So let's take one example. I want to play a C major triad or chord, and there it is. Completely home, completely safe, completely familiar, and a little bit vanilla. Okay, so we've heard that chord 1,000 times before, and it's fine, but it doesn't really have a whole lot of color in it, apart from this kind of positivity, if you like, that comes from any major chord. So how could I add something to it that just feels a little bit different in some way? Well, I'll tell you what, let's throw the supertonic in there as well. Now, you may remember the supertonic is the second note of the scale, the second step, and in C major, that's going to be a D. Okay, so there's a C major chord, but with a D in it. Okay, so immediately that's a little bit more interesting. Now, you might be looking up at Logic and saying, hang on, why does that say C add 9 rather than add 2? Well, that's a good question. The way that we can think about D is to think about its step in the scale, and it is absolutely the second step, which means it's also the 9th step. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it would make sense that if the D was here, I can just about play this, I think. It would be C add 9. And as we learned in the previous video, it doesn't matter whether or not I play C major here, or here, or here, they're all C major. And as a result of having a D in my chord, we refer to it as adding the 9th, as if we had played it at the top of the chord rather than bang smack in the middle of it. So there is C add 9 with a D in it, and this is also C add 9, even though we're playing it here. It works exactly like other chord inversions. So that's a nice sound. Okay, quite rootsy, if you like. Now then, what happens if I decided I wanted to add a 7th to the chord? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That would mean a B. Immediately, it's just got this amazingly summery, chilled out, wondrous thing happening. Really nice. So that's what we refer to as a major 7th chord. Why major? Well, remember, this note doesn't exist in the minor scale. It helps if I play the right note and don't splat the keyboard. Okay, so this note here, the 7th step, this particular version of the 7th step only exists in the scale of C major. So what would a C minor chord, C minor 7 chord sound like? Okay, well, we need to remind ourselves about the notes of the C natural minor scale. So in this context, the 7th note is a B flat, B but flat. And we also need to remember that the 3rd note is also flat. here's C major 7 and C minor 7. And what we can do is we can start using 7th chords in different ways. So if I decided I was going to go from, let's say, C major 7 to C minor 7 to F major 7 to F minor 7 and back to C, that would sound like this. So those are the 7th chords, and we use them all of the time. And we've also discovered the 9th chord, which is used all of the time as well. It happens all the time in songwriting that people will play melodies which use the supertonic, or the 9th if you like. Now, why is this note, the supertonic, so useful? Well, the amazing thing is about this particular note is that it basically sounds good with any chord we might want to play, particularly if we're in a major key. I'll show you what I mean. Remember, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and C. Now then, if I just decide to play a chord progression with anything in the bass, and I play D, C, and G in the right hand, it's amazing what happens. Okay, the great thing about this note is it works with every single chord that I could play within any scale. And not just in C major, let's switch to G major. Okay, so if we were in G major, those steps, the supertonic would be here. Okay, and so the same thing is true in any key. So the same thing would be true in F major. Again, in F major, my supertonic is here. So this supertonic is a really useful chord. Now remember, we refer to that as the 9th. Imagine it an octave above where we're playing it, okay? So we've looked at sort of 9th chords, and we've looked at 7th chords, and we need to remember that, of course, we're talking about the difference with 7ths between major and minor. Now, actually, going back to 9ths for a second, what would what I've just played sound like in a minor key? So if we were saying, okay, we're in C minor, more serious, and we put our 9th in, ooh, that's nice and moody. So what would happen now? Okay. Okay, that sounds pretty good too, nice and dramatic. So the supertonic's a really useful way of being able to add some colour into the chords that we might play. Okay, so we've talked about the 9th and we've talked about the 7th. Now you might be thinking, well, why aren't we talking about the 3rd or the 5th? Well, remember, they are each chord, okay? So in C major, the 3rd and 5th are always going to be there, and in C minor, the 3rd and the 5th are always going to be there. So what about this 4th note here? That's adding some nice colour as well, this slightly interesting sort of tone. Now the thing about the 4th note of the scale is that it wants to resolve. It is surrounded, if you think about this, almost kind of like a magnet, if you like. So if I wanted to play, let's say, a C major chord, and let's suppose I put in a 4th, it really sounds like it wants to go there, to resolve and to go home, if you like, or it feels like it wants to go here, to either become the 5th note in the scale or the 3rd. So the thing about the 4th note of the scale is it feels, well, I'm going to use the word kind of pregnant. It feels like it wants to go somewhere and deliver to a different note, if that makes sense. So effectively what we get is this kind of amazingly loaded chord that feels like it wants to just resolve or go somewhere else. And the same thing is true in minor chords. So the fourth note is a really useful one for creating this resolution. Now then, here is where things start to get interesting. So if I'm in C major, and I know that F is the fourth note of my scale, what I can do is to create what's called a 4-3 suspension. Okay, now then, let me show you what I mean. We've been learning about seventh chords a little moment ago, and we've discovered a couple of interesting things. Now then, if I decide to play a G7 chord, okay, which is G, but with the flat 7 in it because I'm in C major. I can't put that in it because this note doesn't exist in C major. So this is what's called a G7 chord, otherwise known as the dominant seventh, because the dominant is the fifth of C major, and here we're adding the seventh. So here is a dominant seventh chord, or G7 as we refer to it, and here's what happens when we resolve it to C major, and it's gonna feel like going home. Now then, if I decide that what I'm going to do is to keep the F in the chord after I resolve to C major, and then I let it fall to the third, we get what's called a suspension. We're suspending this note over the chord change. Or, in a minor key, either way, we end up with this suspension because this note, which exists in the chord before it, is hanging around until we let it go home. So that's what's referred to as a 4-3 suspension. Now remember, for suspensions, what we need to do is to remember the note names relative to the key in which we're working. I'm in C major, so F is the fourth, and it's resolving to a 3, a suspension of 4-3. So what would a 2-3 suspension sound like? Okay, so in C major, this is note 2, and again, we could put that with a G under it. So that's a 2-3 suspension. It's going from note 2 to note 3. And we could do something similar, let's say, with note 6. So note 6 is here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so this is an A. So what I might do is to put an F chord under this, because an A is in the chord of F major. So what I could do here would be to say, okay, that's a 6-5 suspension where I go from 6 to 5 to resolve that chord. Again, F major, C major with a 6 in it. So sometimes what people will say is, okay, can you play me C major 6? Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means C major with a 6. Or they might play C major 9, well, we've learned about that. Or they might say C major 7. There's the major 7th. Or they might say C minor 7. And so on and so forth. Now, the great thing again about Logic's chord reader up at the top is that any chord you play, it will read. C minor 7, F major 7, A flat major 7. And this is where things get really nice and spicy. Sevenths next to each other. It's the source. Okay, so here what I'm playing here is what's called a D flat major 7 and 9. Okay, so things are getting a bit more interesting now. There's D flat major with its 7th and its 9th. So we can make chords as complicated as we want to. All we need to do is to say to ourselves, right, what is the root note of the chord we're playing? And what notes do we want to add to it to give it more color? And of course, if we only deal with straightforward root position chords, what we can do is always going to be limited. The moment we start to break the shackles of just working in root positions and just working with this kind of diatonic harmony, these kind of 3-note chords, we add a bit of colour in some way, suddenly things start getting a whole lot more interesting.